Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Nick here with you. Welcome back to the channel, and welcome to, unfortunately, a very sad video here on the channel. You might have heard this week on Wednesday that the Beach Boys singer and songwriter, musical legend Brian Wilson passed away at the age of 82 on Wednesday after a battle with dementia over the last couple of years. And I just wanted to come on here and talk about it on the channel because I am a massive Beach Boys fan, a massive Brian Wilson fan. I have been since I was a kid. I've loved the music of Brian Wilson, and when I saw this news that came out on Wednesday, I was absolutely devastated. My heart just sank because I adore Brian Wilson. I adore the music of Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys. And, it's kind of like it's celebrities, musicians, famous people die all the time, right? But not all of those big names that pass away have that profound impact on us. Depending on who it is, it has a different impact on us. But not every celebrity, when they're a musician or a star, when they pass away, is it like something that really affects me. But when I saw the news that Brian Wilson had passed away, my heart just sank because that was such incredibly sad news to see. Because, like I said, I love the music of Brian Wilson. I love the man. The music of the Beach Boys has been there for me for my entire life. And I just was thinking about like what an incredible life in music. And obviously Brian Wilson is famous for the struggles that he went through in his life just as much as he is for the beautiful music that he gave us over so many decades. But just an incredible life in music, an incredible impact on the world of music and different musicians, as well as the fans of us, those of us who are fans of Brian Wilson. He had an impact on musicians. I was reading online so many different musicians, from Paul McCartney to Bruce Springsteen to all sorts of famous musicians were paying tribute to Brian Wilson. He had a profound impact across musical genres, not just within the world of rock or orchestral or pop music. He had an impact across the board with so many different bands and so many different artists, as well as us fans. So, he's even had an impact on me as a songwriter. I've written a couple of songs over the years, and more than a couple of songs over the years, that were trying to echo the Beach Boys and trying to capture those harmonies and trying to find that vibe. And I've written, a couple of good songs over the years that were very influenced by the Beach Boys. And like I said, I grew up on the music of the Beach Boys. Okay. Like right back to when I was a kid. When I was a kid, there used to be, it's not around anymore, but there used to be a radio station here in Hamilton called Oldies 1150. Which played all sorts of great music from the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. And I was born in the 80s, and I grew up a little bit in the 80s, more of a 90s kid, but I grew up for a good part of the 80s. And I always remember being in the car. I still have these memories, these like really vivid memories of being in the car with my mom. My mom and dad are big music fans. They have been their entire lives, and listening to Oldies 1150 with my mom. There was so much great music on there. This was the 80s, so it actually wasn't really that old when you think about it at the time. But listening to bands like the Beach Boys and the Beatles and Motown and all those great artists, Marvin Gaye, and over time, the Beach Boys and the Beatles became like my favorite bands when I was a kid. And, in terms of Beach Boys songs, I used to love I Get Around. I used to love Good Vibrations and Wouldn't It Be Nice, and all those early to mid period Beach Boys songs from, 1963 to 1966 when they put out Pet Sounds. So I grew up with the Beach Boys on the radio. Always have memories of listening to them growing up. And then when I got older, actually when I was in my 20s, and I became a musician myself when I was a teenager, and when I was in my 20s, I really went deep into the Beach Boys because I knew all the hits, but I didn't necessarily know all those key album tracks that were so key to their catalog. These songs that were just as classic and just as amazing as their big hits. So I started getting to albums like Summer Days and Summer Nights and the Beach Boys Today and the Beach Boys Party and All Summer Long, and of course Pet Sounds, which was their magnum opus, and is such an amazing album even to this day. Like Pet Sounds is really just next level musicianship, production, vocals, and everything. So I got into them a little bit more or even deeper when I was in my 20s, and then actually during the pandemic, I thought to myself, I've never actually listened to every Beach Boys album in their discography in order, in sequence. Done that with lots of other bands, but the Beach Boys have a very extensive discography. I think it's at least 25 to 30 studio albums that they've released since the 1960s. So I went, you know what? I was like, I got Spotify. It's easy to go on there and listen to all those Beach Boys albums. So I started with the first record, which I think is Surfin' Safari. I think that was the first record. Surfin' Safari, listened to that record, and then went all the way through to the stuff that they were releasing in the 80s. I did a full deep dive into every Beach Boys album, every single studio record, and I developed yet another new appreciation for the Beach Boys and their music, like all the way, you know, through the late 60s into the 70s. And I think I always had this misconception when I was younger growing up, because, you know, there's that Bare Naked Lady song called Brian Wilson, which came out in the 1990s as kind of like a song that they wrote about the life of Brian Wilson. We all know that famous chorus, lying in bed just like Brian Wilson did. Very, very talkative about, you know, his struggles that he had when he was making Smile and all that kind of stuff. And so that kind of stuck in my head. Well, I'm like, you know, I thought, okay, well, after Pet Sounds and Smile kind of fell apart, that Brian Wilson just fell off the face of the earth, and that was it. And that's all that we heard from him. But that's not really true, because Brian Wilson, even though he wasn't as much of the driving force and the creative force behind the Beach Boys, obviously Carl Wilson and Dennis Wilson and Mike Love and all the members, Al Jardine and Mike Johnson, I'll just list all the members, they continued on with the Beach Boys, and they became more of an active live band again, less of a studio bound band. But Brian Wilson was still writing songs throughout that whole period, from the late 60s into the 70s into the 80s, still writing songs, still writing really great songs for the Beach Boys during that period. So I always had this misconception that he was just like lying in bed and he gave up on life and that was all we heard from him. But no, he kept going during every era of the Beach Boys career. So he was really still a super strong force for the Beach Boys. And then he had his struggles, and then he came out of it. He revived his career. You know, we were talking about Smile and how that album was mostly abandoned. There were lots of songs from Smile that ended up on later albums, but he abandoned that project. And then in 2004, he completed the Smile project with this new version of the album. And when this came out, I was absolutely obsessed with it. I was so into the Beach Boys at the time, still am. But when this version of Smile came out in 2004, it blew my mind. Like when you hear Our Prayer and G into Heroes and Villains, and then all the rest of the songs, Cab and Essence is wonderful, Surf's Up, Good Vibrations at the end of the album. This was such a revelation for me and something that I enjoyed so much. And then, of course, in 2011, the Beach Boys released most of those original sessions from the 1960s as the Smile sessions. So I found it so incredible that Brian Wilson, in spite of his struggles, he made a comeback. He went out and played live again. He had lots of great musicians working with him over the years, and he went out and did his thing. And it felt like, you know, we had him back, and it was just great to see him on stage. Unfortunately, I never got to see Brian Wilson live in concert, which is something that I really regret. But it was still incredible that he revived his career. And then in 2012, the Beach Boys released That's Why God Made the Radio, which was kind of like their reunion album. And I absolutely loved that record when it came out. I loved all the songs on that record. You know, the title track, That's Why God Made the Radio, songs like Spring Vacation, Isn't It Time, Summer's Gone, which is a really sad song kind of in hindsight now when thinking about Brian Wilson. So I really loved that record. And he was like, I just was thinking about the music of Brian Wilson and how, you know, he brought so much light into the world. He brought so much beauty into the world. When you listen to Beach Boys music, it was music that was written to make people feel good, whether it was the surfing songs, whether it was the car songs, whether it was the ballads like Surfer Girl or In My Room or songs like that. Like really, the Beach Boys, when you were listening to those voices, they just made you feel great. And I wrote this on my Instagram post about Brian Wilson. It's like, yeah, when I listen to the Beach Boys, especially a lot of those ballads like Girls on the Beach or songs like that, I'm So Young, I'm like, I just picture myself on a beach as the sun's going down and the waves are lapping over me. And I feel peace. And Brian Wilson's music brought that to us. It brought us peace. It brought us beauty. It brought us light. And not every musician, as much as I love every musician, you know, that's my favorite, like not all of them are able to achieve that with their music. And Brian Wilson, you know, like I said, despite his struggles with mental health and a lot of the things that he went through in his life, his music touched everyone and brought positivity to the world, which in these days in 2025, we need as much of that as possible. So it's just so sad that Brian Wilson is no longer with us, because he was such a light in this world and such a positive presence and brought people so much beauty and so much light, that it's especially sad that he's passed away. And, it was sad that his wife Melinda passed away, I believe last year or the year before. He developed dementia. He's getting older, that happens. And it sounded like, he had some really good people around him, from his daughters to his musician friends. And then lots of other, the Beach Boys, I know there's been lots of debate about his relationship with Mike Love, but Al Jardine, his relationship with the other members of the Beach Boys, he was really had some good people around him. I think. I hope he was able to kind of live out his last days and not have to worry about too much. And so like I was saying, so many musicians were influenced by him and his music. Like I was saying, Paul McCartney, a fellow genius. I'm a huge Beatles fan. You see, they're right here. I'm a huge Beatles fan, and so like even Paul McCartney, who wrote some of the great albums, was very influenced and inspired by Brian Wilson. Obviously, we all know the story about how the Beatles made Rubber Soul, and that album blew Brian Wilson's mind and inspired him to write Pet Sounds. And then Paul McCartney heard Pet Sounds, and then he was inspired to do something like Sgt. Pepper. So that kind of back and forth, that musical conversation that they were having in the 1960s, was really, really cool. I think that was like a really classic, amazing time in music. And I know initially for the Beach Boys, because they were from Hawthorne, California, they had their own scene going on. They didn't know what was bubbling up in Liverpool, England, when the Beatles were getting together, but they were very much contemporaries, coming out at the same time, 1962, 1963, 1964. And Brian Wilson was actually kind of shocked. I read a Brian Wilson book a bunch of years ago, and he was kind of shocked by the Beatles, because the Beach Boys were on this like upward trajectory, and they were still on that after the Beatles came out. But the shine came off the Beach Boys a little bit when the Beatles hit the scene, because obviously Beatlemania hit America in 1964. And that kind of, I don't know, it didn't cut the Beach Boys off at the knees or anything like that. It didn't really like derail their career too much, because obviously they were still very popular, still had a million hits that we all know and love. But that was a little bit of that competition going on at the time. And I think, Brian Wilson said that it kind of affected him mentally, being like, okay, well now I got to compete with these four dudes from England that I didn't even know existed. And then that turned, obviously, like I said, into an amazing musical conversation between the Beatles and the Beach Boys. And when it comes to my favorite, I wouldn't really call either of them like classic rock, but my favorite classic bands, the Beatles and the Beach Boys, are kind of like the Beatles will always be a little bit higher, because I love the Beatles like nothing else, but the Beach Boys are right up there for me. And I don't really have like in terms of vinyl and CDs, I have Pet Sounds on CD. I have That's What I Got Made the Radio on CD. Don't really have too much in terms of like Beach Boys vinyl. I have 15 Big Ones, which is. It's an album of covers. It's not really anybody's favorite Beach Boys album. Brian Wilson was going through a little bit of a thing at that time, but there's that original lineup of the Beach Boys. Obviously, Dennis Wilson and Carl Wilson were still with us. And then this one's cool too. This one's a more classic from the 1960s. This is the Beach Boys Concert, which is another really great live record. I absolutely love it. And I was actually looking online today, and they were showing some footage of the Beach Boys on Full House, which as a kid growing up in the 80s and the 90s, I watched Full House religiously on TGIF on Friday nights. And then I remember the Beach Boys being guests on Full House, because John Stamos from Full House, obviously very close relationship with the Beach Boys, playing drums for them over the years. So John Stamos was very much part of that Beach Boys camp. And then he recorded Forever, which is the Dennis Wilson song / Beach Boys song. And then I didn't know, but the clip I saw had Brian Wilson on the show, and I didn't realize that. I thought it was always the other members of the Beach Boys who appeared on Full House, but there he was on the couch, and I thought that was really cool, because that was a big part of my growing up as well. Songs like Kokomo in the late 80s and stuff like that. So it's cool to see them on Full House. But anyways, gonna wrap up this video, but I just actually wanted to talk about some of my favorite Beach Boys songs, my favorite Brian Wilson songs, make some recommendations about some of my songs. I just pulled up my iTunes here just to take a look. But yeah, again, the Beach Boys ballads are really some of their best songs. And we think about classic Beach Boys ballads like Surfer Girl and In My Room, and some of the was it Don't Worry Baby, which was like some of the biggest hits. But then there's some other great Beach Boys ballads with Brian Wilson on lead vocals that really just blow my mind, whether that's The Surfer Moon, Girls on the Beach, Hushabye. Those songs are just absolutely amazing. And then like kind of from the earlier parts of their career, we had the big surfing songs and the car songs like Surfing Safari, Little Do Scoop, Beast, True to Your School, Catch a Wave, Surfing USA, I Get Around, obviously, Wendy. So many great songs. And then you kind of get into some of the other stuff on Summer Days and Summer Nights and Today. Those are some of my favorite Beach Boys records. They're like proto Pet Sounds, where Brian Wilson's songwriting was really starting to crescendo and get into those amazing songs. But like Summer Days and Summer Nights has The Girl from New York City, Girl Don't Tell Me, California Girls, obviously one of the greatest pop singles ever written. But also on the flip side has some really great songs like Let 'Em Run Wild. If you haven't heard that song, it's one of my favorite Beach Boys songs, one of my favorite Brian Wilson vocals. You're So Good to Me is another good one. And then on the flip side of Today, you had songs like Please Let Me Wonder, I'm So Young, Kiss Me Baby. It has really some classic Beach Boys ballads on the second half of Today. And then when you get into Pet Sounds is Pet Sounds. It's untouchable, right from the get-go. Wouldn't It Be Nice is one of my favorite Beach Boys tracks. And then other ones like That's Not Me, I'm Waiting for the Day, I Just Wasn't Made for These Times, obviously God Only Knows. Incredible. And then after that, obviously with Smile, it kind of fell apart until 2004. Other songs ended up on other albums, whether it's Cabanescence or Surf's Up, Good Vibrations. But then some of those records that they released in the late 60s and the 70s, like albums like Wild Honey, Friends, 2020. And then one of my favorite Beach Boys songs, which Brian Wilson was a co-writer on, Sail On Sailor, which is from the Holland album in 1973 with Blondie Chaplin on lead vocals. Absolutely incredible song. And then obviously we get into stuff like Kokomo, and then later on when the band got back together in 2012 and they did That's Why God Made the Radio. I really thought that was a great comeback record. And then in terms of actual Brian Wilson songs, he released a lot of solo music just as Brian Wilson. And I really loved his album Lucky Old Son, which came out in 2008. And then in 2015, he put out an album called No Peer Pressure. And there's a song on that record that I absolutely adore. It's called Guess You Had to Be There with the singer Casey Musgraves, who I'm also a big fan of. That's an incredible song. It's really, again, such a great song that makes you feel good. And that's what Brian Wilson's music really, really did. It made us feel good. It made us feel positive. And, I think that is one of his lasting legacies of Brian Wilson, is that he left a mark of positivity. He left this world by changing it for the better. And I really do just cherish and I'm thankful for the music of Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys, because it's brought a lot of positivity and light to my life. And I was absolutely devastated to hear the news about Brian Wilson passing away at the age of 82 on Wednesday. But it took me a couple of days. It's been a very busy week. It took me a couple of days to get on here and talk about it. So I hope you guys don't mind me waxing a little bit poetic about Brian Wilson and his music. But yeah, I'm going to throw it over to you guys. Let me know in the comments your memories of Brian Wilson, your favorite Brian Wilson and Beach Boys songs. Let's get a conversation going, talking about, the term legend might get thrown around a little flippantly every now and then, but really Brian Wilson, absolute legend of the music world, and just so thankful for what he gave us with music. So let me know in the comments below your memories, your thoughts, your favorite songs. Let's talk a little bit about Brian Wilson, the man and the legend. And yeah, thanks a lot for watching this video, guys. Make sure to give me a thumbs up if you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and follow me on social media as well at Nick Chino Music. Got another video coming this weekend, which is my music reaction to the new song from Biffy Clyro, which is called A Little Love. And actually, fun connection between Biffy Clyro and the Beach Boys. Biffy Clyro recorded God Only Knows, their version, the live version of God Only Knows, for their live album in 2018. So there's even a connection there. Beach Boys, Brian Wilson even had an influence on Biffy Clyro. So that's pretty cool. Nice correlation between those two artists. So anyways, guys, thanks for watching the video. Rest in peace, Brian Wilson. You'll be missed more than you'll ever know. An absolute legend, and it's really sad to say goodbye, but rest in peace, Brian Wilson.